All right, let's get started. Welcome to Adept Packaging's May Learning Share. Today's topic is sustainability in the age of COVID-19. For today's presentation, all of our attendees have had their lines placed on mute. If you wish to ask a question today, you can type your question into the chat box at any time throughout the presentation. Please be sure to send your questions to Adept Packaging host, and we'll read them at the end of the presentation. You can also ask a question at the conclusion of the presentation by taking your line off of mute first. You'll see that we do have a polling function again for this month's presentation, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So if you'd like to reach out to us, please make sure you provide your email address or some sort of contact information in the poll so that we can contact you. We appreciate all of your responses. So we'll go ahead and get started by introducing today's speaker. Today we welcome JD English. JD is a packaging engineer here at Adept, and he has 13 years of experience in the consumer packaged goods industry. He's supported packaging at some of the most globally recognized brands, including Avon, Clorox, Danone, L'Oreal, Unilever, and Wrigley. He's delivered programs against innovation, cost savings, and sustainability metrics. During his career, he's been granted 6 patents, delivered $30 million in cost savings, and most recently supported the commercialization of a 100% PCR package for a billion-dollar condiment brand. JD holds a Bachelor's of Science in Packaging from Michigan State University and a Master's in Business Administration from Rutgers University. So at this time, I'd like to hand the presentation over to JD, and thanks, JD.
All right, thanks for that nice introduction, Kristen, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. The U.S. has now been dealing with the public health crisis for nearly 3 months. More than 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment, and that number is likely to increase even as states begin to gradually get back to a new normal and until a vaccine for coronavirus has been approved and distributed at a large scale. For the second quarter, U.S. GDP is expected to contract by 30% or $6.5 trillion. For those unfamiliar with the breakdown of GDP, consumer spending accounts for approximately 70% of that, or in this case, $4.5 trillion of spending. With this massive contraction of the economy, Adept has observed industries shifting to cash conservation mode, with the typical capital-intensive priorities in a growing economy taking the backseat, namely innovation and sustainability. But does it have to be that way? I would argue not. If we can reframe cost savings programs through a lens of sustainability metrics, we see areas of mutual benefit or multiple win-win scenarios, and that's what I'll be talking through today. As companies look to squeeze every penny out of their packaging value chains, Adept has seen resources shift away from sustainability to higher ROI work streams. While consumer expectations are expected to shift through the pandemic, it's unlikely that sustainability will no longer be a consideration, especially with millennial and Gen Z generation. It will likely drop down consumers' priority lists when purchasing a product, but companies that can highlight sustainability and deliver a safe product will have a decidedly strong market position. In addition to this, if we think about it, the science of climate change is not going to change because of the pandemic. The packaging value chain will continue to have the environmental impact it's always had. In fact, one could argue that it is more important now than ever to focus on sustainability. Let's consider the consumer goods industry. People are spending more time than ever indoors, cooking nearly all their meals and deep cleaning on a daily basis, and this shows in the grocery store sales numbers. March saw a 30% year-over-year increase, and April saw a 13% year-over-year increase in same-store sales. This is a drastic departure from the typical low single-digit growth that grocery stores see. With this in mind, I would argue that packaging sustainability is more important than ever in the consumer goods space because packaging is being purchased and consumed at historical rates. A recent forum that I was a part of reported that residential waste collection is up 20% in the month of April. And so this requires us as a packaging community to think creatively about how to achieve sustainability given the current economic conditions. Or said in a little bit more of a cliche way, it requires us to take lemons and turn them into lemonade. But before we jump into conclusions and creating ideas based off of what we already know, let's first take a step back and define a cost savings approach and sustainability metrics independently. And then we can overlay these analyses and identify areas where both the cost savings and sustainability metrics can be achieved. This will provide us that unique lens in which we can identify a mutual benefit. First, let's look at cost savings. At Adept, we take a holistic approach to cost savings by breaking a package down into constituent parts and evaluating direct and indirect costs tied to it. In some areas, this is commonly referred to as the total cost of ownership approach. If we consider these broad, direct, and indirect areas that impact packaging costs, we can break them into three areas: conversion of those materials into a functional package, and transportation and storage, and all aspects that lie with them. If we look at the materials, there are multiple areas that we can evaluate for costing purposes. For example, what materials are chosen and why? Are materials being chosen for functional requirements, aesthetic requirements, or regulatory requirements? Now, it's likely a mixture of all of the above, but understanding the priority drivers behind material selection allows us to challenge any pre-existing assumptions or biases that may not be critical to a package, resulting in savings opportunities. Also, we need to consider, what is the composition of a material? Is there color? If so, what color and what type of colors? Is it a pellet, liquid, or powder? Those three types of color systems can have different price implications. In addition, we can assess the need for each layer in multi-layer packages, or perhaps the use of additives that aid in processing. It might be used in higher concentrations than are needed. These are just a couple of examples of how materials can impact costs. Next, we consider the conversion process of those materials. We should ensure that the most efficient conversion process and equipment are being utilized for a particular package. Some conversion processes and equipment are better suited for high volume runs, and others are better for low volumes with lots of variation. Also, think about how the package was designed during the initial stages of development and why. Was it designed with a specific conversion process in mind? Perhaps the design unintentionally limits the package to a specific conversion process that is not as efficient as it could be. It's also worth considering if the design lends itself to the lightest package as possible. Here, it's important to understand the engineering safety factor and ask ourselves, is the safety factor being used industry standard, and or does it reflect the actual environment in which the product experiences? Lastly, let's consider a package's dimensions. And this primarily means, are the dimensions larger than they have to be? I think most of us are probably familiar with California's deceptive packaging laws. Designing a package that is just within those standards likely still means that there's some room for further improvement, even though it's just under the letter of the law. So dimensions are definitely an important factor. Lastly, let's look at the transportation of the components. We must consider the shipping origin of our components. Is it domestic or overseas? Are they shipped locally within a municipality, or are they shipped perhaps via ocean freight? Do they come in full truckload quantities or less than truckload quantities? And in those shipments, how are they secured for that shipment? What is the cubic efficiency of the unit load, and how is it received at the filling location? In some circumstances, items need to be shipped to a third party for certain finishing elements, whether it be labeling or decoration of some sort. Understanding this material flow and challenging why items are handled in this manner could result in some areas of cost optimization.